Hey there, I'm Bob Gower. I'm a coach, I'm a consultant, kind of a fixer of teams, a fixer of organizations. And I wanted to talk to you today about decision making and decision making, how it works inside of organizations, because I often find that it's really one of the pivotal things. It's one of the things that makes the biggest difference when we get really clear about it. Many of my clients really struggle with, who makes a decision? Has a decision been made? On what basis has it been made? Have we made the right decision? Can we back out of that? And they struggle with speed, right? They struggle to move quickly as an organization. And one of the things that really slows them down is their ability to make decisions. And so let's talk today a little bit about kind of how we make better decisions as organizations and as groups. So let me minimize myself there. So better group decision making. When we think about decision making, there's really sort of three people or three kinds of ways we can broadly think about it inside of the organization. So if a leader is making a decision, the leader is sort of simply saying, hey, here's what we're going to do. Let's go do this. We could also distribute decision making down to the worker, to the person on the front line who's working with the customer. And that's going to be, hey, here's what I've done, right? So they're going to say, here's what I've done. Here's what I'm going to do. Maybe we don't find out about the decision until a performance review later on, or we're doing a postmortem on something that went wrong, right? But these are largely sort of, let's call these are the two ends. And then, of course, in the middle, kind of approaching the middle, right? The leader, sorry, I misordered these little things a little bit, but the leader can say to the group or to the worker, hey, I'd value your input on this, but they still retain the rights to make the decision on their own. Likewise, the worker could sort of signal to the leader ahead of time, hey, here's what I intend to do. Are you okay with that? And then in the middle is really where we have to figure it all out together. And what I find really fascinating about this and really interesting, really helpful to begin to break this down is that there's real benefits and real liabilities no matter how we make decisions, no matter who makes a decision inside of an organization. And a lot of sort of frameworks and consultants won't tell you that there's always a trade-off, but you know what? There's always a trade-off. There's always going to be a little bit of a challenge. So one is that speed is really important. As I said before, speed of decision-making is often the speed at which our organization moves. And so if the leader is making the decision or the worker is making the decision, either of these cases tend to be really fast because it's falling on a single person to make the decision. Whereas group decision-making, even if we're checking for input ahead of time, just checking for input ahead of time, but especially if we're trying to make a decision together, tends to be painfully slow often. But we also get different solutions. Sorry, I got to move my head around there a little bit. We also get some different circumstances in terms of compliance and engagement, right? Like relative engagement, right? So if I've made the decision myself, I'm going to be really engaged in that. If a leader makes a decision, generally speaking, they're making the decision for the worker, for other people. So I'm going to be more, like, especially if I don't agree with the decision or if it's inconvenient for me, if I'm the worker, I might resist it a little bit. I might do what a manager of mine used to call malicious compliance, right? I'm going to do the letter of the law, but not the spirit of it. Okay, I'll do what you said. Or at worst, I'll pretend to do what you've said, but not actually do it, right? And I see this in a lot of organizations that I work in. So we get more engagement kind of the closer to the right we get here, but we get more, sort of, it can be faster than if the leader is going to make it. And there's another element too here, which is really has to do with sort of information fidelity, right? Garbage in, garbage out. We need good information if we're going to make good decisions. Often leaders, because of their position in the organization, will lack really good information about what's going on with the client. Sorry, New York City is making some noise in the background here. But the leader is going to have some low information fidelity. They're just not going to see everything. I think workers tend to see a little bit more because they're closer to the ground, but they also miss context too because they might not understand sort of cost structure, they might not understand power structure, they might not understand board dynamics or dynamics kind of higher up with bigger clients, these kinds of things, right? So I'm going to call their information fidelity medium. Where we get the highest information fidelity is when we all make decisions together, but again, this tends to be slow. We might get a good decision with high engagement and high information fidelity when we make decisions as a group, but this leads to some troubles. There are a lot of organizations and a lot of models out there that have tried to impact decision-making in a variety of ways. Two that have been really important to me are the Toyota production system. I kind of have a strong background in lean theory and lean dynamics, and Toyota is, of course, a wonderful sort of origin of a lot of that thinking and a powerful case study. But what Toyota leadership did was essentially went to the worker on the floor and said, you probably want to do a better job. You tell me how to do that job better, how I can help you do your job better. And so they began to distribute authority to the people on the floor of the production units. And of course, they lowered defects, they improved throughput, they did all sorts of amazing things, really revolutionizing in many ways the heavy manufacturing industry. Agile software development took those principles and began to apply them into the development of complex computer systems and said, let's build around small cross-functional teams that are empowered to pick their own work, prioritize their own work within constraints, obviously, right? So again, these are sort of distributed decision-making methodologies or frameworks as applied to organizations. I mentioned before sort of the I intend. I'm just going to say for now, read this book. I'll include a link to it in the notes here. David Marquette, who was the commander of the USS Santa Fe, really revolutionized that vessel by asking people to tell him what they intended to do, and then he would approve it or not, rather than him giving them orders. And he really changed the culture, the dynamics, the performance of that vessel. It's a really inspiring story, that I highly recommend. And then Zappos, of course, became famous for delivering happiness, right? Empowering their call center people to really make the customer happy. And I have to say, this is not a paid plug, but I called Zappos. I had reason to call them. I got a blister from a shoe I bought from them the other day. And they delivered happiness like that. It was a delightful human being that I spoke to, and she solved my problem, sent me a new pair of shoes. Like it was like that. It really, really worked. You could really clearly see that she felt empowered, that she felt happy about her work, and the customer outcome was really improved. So again, these are experiments in sort of trying to distribute decision making. So what do I recommend? So when we think about decision making, this is a deep topic. I mean, we could spend months working on this, and I have with many organizations, right? But the idea is essentially that the leader should make decisions relatively rarely, and they should be guardrail focused. They should be defining the playing field inside of which everybody is playing, right? What are the sort of the things that we can't go over? Actually, Tony Hsieh of Zappos used to describe it as he was sort of constructing the greenhouse inside of which everyone would grow. So keep it rare, keep it guardrail focused. The worker should probably be making decisions a lot, frequent and low risk decisions, right? We want to have those guardrails in place so they're relatively low risk, but most decisions should probably be made at the level of execution, at the level of the customer, the level of the build. Really, we want to distribute as much as we can, and this can be done safely, but it needs to be done clearly and carefully. What's really interesting is when we get into the middle. These infrequent, high-risk decisions where we need high information fidelity, we need people to be aligned behind them, and we're willing to take some time to move a little bit slowly. So for this, we end up with two models. And so two models for group decision making are consensus. This is the one where most of us are familiar with, where we're trying to get everybody to be a yes, right? If we're trying to choose what restaurant to go to, trying to choose what movie to watch at night, we want everybody to be happy with it. So let's get to a yes. In the business environment, this tends to surface way too much information, right? Because everybody starts thinking about edge cases. Everybody also starts thinking about how they can get their own way often, right? So it can kind of create this sort of bullying or grandstanding situation. And this is what I see in most organizations, is that no becomes the easiest answer. We're just going to kick that can down the road a bit further and have another meeting later about the same damn thing. So consensus doesn't really work that well. And I want to propose an alternative model, which, by the way, comes out of holacracy, sociocracy, and a few other places as well. I've actually been trying to trace down the origins of this, and I haven't done a good job. So if you know, leave me a message. I would love to know more about the origins of this. But I've been working with this model for about 15 years, and I love it, right? So what we're going to try to do is move to a consent-based model, which simply means that we don't have to get everybody to a yes, but we do have to make the item safe enough to try that no one is going to object to it. Safe enough to try that no one is going to object to it. This tends to surface all the relevant information. It creates a bias for action, but it does require brief and intense focus. And in future videos, and actually in some writing that I'll do that I'll also attach here, I'm going to go over exactly how to go through this, how to do consent-based decision making. If you have any questions about this or you want to comment on this video, please do so below, and please reach out if I can help you in any way. Thanks.